There you are again. Welcome to the Book Corner. We're continuing to read Prince Caspian by C.S. Lewis. This is part 5 in our series, and so we're going to hear the dwarf tell the children something about Prince Caspian, who he is. Remember that last time the children saved the dwarf from two soldiers who were going to throw him all tied up into the water and drown him. But Susan had put an arrow in her bow and had shot it. And the soldiers were so afraid of what they thought were ghosts that they jumped into the water and skedaddled, went away on the other side of the river where they were. And then the children rescued the dwarf, and they got to know him a little bit, and he helped them catch some fish, and they had some fish to eat instead of just apples. And then he now is going to tell his story, because the children say he needs to tell his story first. So last time we had just read this sentence, and I'm going to pick it up right where that sentence is and go from there. You tell us your story first, said Peter, and then we'll tell you ours. Well, said the dwarf, as you've saved my life, it is only fair that you should have your own way. But I hardly know where to begin. First of all, I'm a messenger of King Caspian. Who's he? Asked 4 voices all at once. Caspian the 10th, King of Narnia, and long may he reign, answered the dwarf. That is to say, he ought to be King of Narnia, and we hope he will be. At present, he is only King of us old Narnians. What do you mean by old Narnians, please? Asked Lucy. Why, that's us, said the dwarf. We're a kind of rebellion, I suppose. A kind of rebellion, I suppose. I see, said Peter, and Caspian is the chief old Narnian? Well, in a manner of speaking, said the dwarf, scratching his head, but he's really a new Narnian himself, a Telmarine, if you follow me. I don't, said Edmund. It's worse than the War of the Roses, said Lucy. The War of the Roses is part of English history, and different kings fighting against different kings and so on. And so Lucy says, oh, this is confusing. It's worse than the War of the Roses. Oh dear, said the dwarf. I'm doing this very badly. Look here. I think I'll have to go right back to the beginning and tell you how Caspian grew up in his uncle's court and how he comes to be on our side at all. But it'll be a long story. All the better, said Lucy. We love stories. So the dwarf settled down and told his tale. I shall not give it to you in his words, putting in all the children's questions and interruptions, because it would take too long and be confusing, and even so, it would leave out some points that the children only heard later. But the gist of the story, as they knew it in the end, was as follows. So now the narrator, or C.S. Lewis, the storyteller, is the narrator. He's going to tell the story of Prince Caspian, but he says, I'm not going to say it just the way the dwarf said it. I'm going to kind of recast it and tell it as a story. But this is in gist what he said. In other words, this is basically what he said, but I'm going to say it in my own words. And that's probably good because C.S. Lewis is a pretty good storyteller. All right. So now we start chapter 4 in the book, and that one is titled The Dwarf Tales of Prince Caspian. And here begins the story. Prince Caspian lived in a great castle in the center of Narnia, with his uncle, Miraz, King of Narnia, and his aunt, who had red hair and was called Queen this is a long word, Queen Prunaprismia. I hope we don't have to say that word very often. Anyway, maybe we'll summarize it, just say Queen Prune. Pruna, well, anyway, his father and mother were dead. that is, Caspian's father and mother were dead, and the person whom Caspian loved best was his nurse. And though, being a prince, he had wonderful toys with which to do almost anything but talk, he liked best the hour of the day when the toys had all been put back in their cupboards, and nurse would tell him stories. He did not care much for his uncle and aunt, but about twice a week his uncle would send for him, and they would talk up and down together. They would walk up and down together for half an hour on the terrace at the north side of the castle. One day, while they were doing this, the king said to him, "Well, boy, we must soon teach you to ride and to use a sword. You know that your aunt and I have no children, so it looks as if you might have to be king when I'm gone. How shall you like that, eh?" "I don't know, uncle," said Caspian. "Don't know, eh? Said Miraz. "Why, I should like to know what more anyone could wish for." "All the same, I do wish," said Caspian. "What do you wish?" asked the king. I wish, I wish, I wish I could have lived in the old days," said Caspian. He was only a very little boy at the time. Up till now, King Miraz had been talking in the tiresome way that grown-ups have of talking, which makes it quite clear that they are not really interested in what they are saying. But now he suddenly gave Caspian a very sharp look. "Eh? What's that?" he said. "What old days do you mean?" "Oh, don't you know, uncle," said Caspian, "when everything was quite different, when all the animals could talk, and there were nice people who lived in streams and the trees, naiads and dyads they were called, and there were dwarfs, and there were lovely little fawns in all the woods, and they had feet like goats, and—" "That's all nonsense for babies," said the king sternly. "Only fit for babies, do you hear? You're getting too old for that sort of stuff. At your age, you ought to be thinking of battles and adventures, not fairy tales." "Oh, but there were battles and adventures in those days," said Caspian. "Wonderful adventures. Once there was a white witch, and she made herself queen of the whole country, and she made it so that it was always winter. And then 2 boys and 2 girls came from somewhere, and so they killed the witch, and they were made kings and queens of Narnia. And their names were Peter and Susan and Edmund and Lucy. And so they reigned forever so long. And everyone had a lovely time, and it was all because of Aslan." "Who's he?" said Miraz, as if Caspian had been a very little older. The tone of his uncle's voice would have warned him that it would be wiser to shut up, but he babbled on. If he had been a little older, he would have recognized the tone of voice was pretty negative. "Oh, don't you know?" Caspian said. "Aslan is the great lion who comes from over the sea." "Who has been telling you all this nonsense?" said the king in a voice of thunder. Oh, he said it real loud. Caspian was frightened and said nothing. Your Royal Highness," said King Miraz, letting go of Caspian's hand, which he had been holding till now, "I insist upon being answered. Look me in the face. Who has been telling you this pack of lies?" "Nurse," faltered Caspian, and burst into tears. "Stop that noise," said his uncle, taking Caspian by the shoulders and giving him a shake. "Stop it, and never let me catch you talking, or thinking either, about all those silly stories again. There never were those kings and queens. How could there be 2 kings at the same time? And there's no such person as Aslan. And there are no such things as lions. And there never was a time when animals could talk. Do you hear?" "Yes, uncle," sobbed Caspian. "Then let's have no more of it," said the king. Then he called to one of the gentlemen in waiting who were standing at the far end of the terrace and said, in a cold voice, "Conduct His Royal Highness to his apartments. and send His Royal Highness's nurse to me at once." Next day Caspian found what a terrible thing he had done, for nurse had been sent away without even being allowed to say goodbye to him, and he was told he was to have a tutor. Caspian missed his nurse very much and shed many tears, and because he was so miserable, he thought about the old stories of Narnia far more than before. He dreamed of dwarves and dryads every night, and tried very hard to make the dogs and the cats in the castle talk to him, but the dogs only wagged their tails and the cats only purred. Caspian felt sure that he would hate the new tutor, but when the new tutor arrived about a week later, he turned out to be the sort of person it is almost impossible not to like. He was the smallest and almost the fattest man Caspian had ever seen. He had a long, silvery pointed beard, which came down to his waist, and his face, which was brown and covered with wrinkles, looked very wise, very ugly, and very kind. His voice was grave and his eyes were merry, so that, until you got to know him really well, it was hard to know when he was joking and when he was serious. His name was Dr. Cornelius. Well, I think I'm going to stop right there. And next time, we'll find out more about this new tutor, about Dr. Cornelius, what he's like. We do see a little picture of him in the book. See there? He's a short man. He's got a long, pointy beard. So we're going to find out more about him. But we've learned that Prince Caspian, when he was young, had a nurse, someone who took care of him and stayed with him and told him stories and probably fed him and put him to bed at night. And the nurse had told him stories about old Narnia, about a time when animals could talk, and about a king named Aslan, about kings and queens named Peter and Susan and Edmund and Lucy. But when he told the king, King Miraz, about this, King Miraz told him not to talk about that, not even to think about that. For some reason, he really doesn't like those sorts of stories. And so the nurse was dismissed. And so poor little Prince Caspian very much missed his nurse, whom he loved. But now a tutor has come, and the tutor is Dr. Cornelius. And we'll see how he gets along with Dr. Cornelius and what kind of person he is and what kinds of things, maybe stories that he tells as well. Okay? Well, that's it for today. I hope you have a good day. Bye for now.